Okay, good morning, everyone, and a big welcome to the April NSA Breakfast Club. The subject today is around the politics of numbers or data. I'm going to swap that number, the use of the word numbers for data, because there's we all know that there's some huge benefits in sharing data. There's a lot of power in data, but there also are sensitivities around data as well. And today's subject is today's speakers and session. I think we're going to explore some of the real opportunities that we could gain through sharing data and using data more effectively, but we also will touch on some of those sensitivities of data as well. We could very well have called this session "The Power of Numbers or Data," but because of those sensitivities, we've decided to call it the politics of data. We got three great speakers today, and I also would just like to add that today's Breakfast Club webinar is sponsored by Roythorns. They're our solicitors. They do a great job. We do a lot of work with them, and I'd like to thank them very much for sponsoring our breakfast clubs this season. We got three great speakers, and I'll introduce those in order as we get going. We are going to be coming probably more from an animal health perspective, but not entirely, because while many of us believe our industry as a whole has much to gain from sharing data, we also know that there are risks. We know that data could be used to undermine others. And without anyone really realizing what it might be used for, it may be used to discredit our interest by the anti-livestock brigade. We've certainly had examples of that in the past. And as individuals, we could be identified and maybe even teased out of supply chains if things go wrong. For example, if we've had a particular health problem on the farm, an abortion storm, and maybe our antibiotic use has gone up, could that be identified, and could we be discriminated within a supply chain arrangement because of that? So there are risks, and we also know that sheep farming is very much it is a business activity, but it's very much a way of life too. And for farmers, sharing data about our ups and downs can feel sometimes like sharing our souls. Actually, it's not always a very comfortable thing to do, and I won't be alone in been able to remember many conversations that you have between farmers where we talk about our lambing percentages, and we say that we've had a good season. It's been about 1.8 lambing percentage, and actually we know if we dig below the surface a little bit, it's not been that good. And maybe if you look at things in the whole, and you look at ewes that went to the ram as well, it might be a lot lower than that. It could be a lot closer to 1.6 really. So sharing accurate data is another issue I think that we need to explore within this. We are in a position now though where we know that there are massive gains to be had by sharing data at an aggregated level on a national scale. We can learn an awful lot from that. But we know that there are risks too. And we have got some really powerful tools that are in place and that are in the offing as well. Tools such as the eMedicines Hub, the new livestock information service, as well as a really powerful tool that will actually be as much about the ability to share information as it is about movements reporting. We're getting close anyway to the launch of the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway in England, and I'm sure we'll see similar initiatives in devolved nations as well. But Pathway as well has got a really strong element there of recording data, sharing data, and making sure we use that data to drive the industry forward. So the question really is, how do we get to a place where we are prepared to share accurate data and information, knowing that it's going to benefit us and not undermine what we're trying to achieve? And with that introduction, really, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, which is Jeanette Allen. Jeanette is actually it's got very little to do with sheep, but she's the chief executive of the Horse Society. And the reason we've asked Jeanette to come along and talk today is because of her role within the Traceability Design Users Group, and the fact that Jeanette now chairs a newly formed data advisory panel. That panel has been established really to give guidance to both DEFRA and AHDB on the use of and the release of data that is being generated through the LIS. Jeanette, I know you're going to have some things that are really relevant to contribute to this subject, so I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Jeanette. You're on mute.
I need that mug. Okay. I need that mug.
There you go. Jeanette, before you start as well, can I ask people to put if you've got questions, use Q&A if you can. We'll keep an eye on Q&A, and we'll try and go through all the speakers, and then we'll deal with questions and discussion at the end of the session. So Jeanette.
Thanks, Phil. So yes, I run the Horse Trust, which may seem a bit random, but the plan from the beginning was that horses will eventually end up being part of the Livestock Information Service, because however small the number, we still have horses going through abattoir and into the food chain. So there's a connection in there, but we're quite low on the list. But right from the beginning, we had to make sure, no, don't ask that of horse owners. That won't work. So we've been in it right from the beginning, and it's been incredibly interesting. And I've learned a lot more about livestock farming than I knew before. So there we go. So the data advisory panel, that's something Phil and I and a couple of other members of the TDUG group felt completely passionate about, that there needed to be governance in place before data started being shared out of this new leviathan of a data system. And so far it's working really well. And to let you know the structure, so the data, the statutory data that you put into the list system, that is owned by ADHB and DEFRA. They are the data owners, so they will make the final decisions on data requests. But data access requests now go through our panel first, so we get the opportunity to really interrogate, and we usually have the person representative of the body asking for data there for us to literally interrogate, and we interrogate their application, and we make a recommendation to the data owners as to whether we feel this is a good application or not. Usually what's come out so far is, if we're supporting an application, we will put in a load of caveats that we're suggesting are added into the data request, and those caveats really are about being the safety net for unforeseen consequences. And that's very much what we see our role as being. So at the moment, we have a government whose policy is data should be shared. We might have a government that feel differently. We're not interested in party politics and policy. We're interested in what's in the interest of farmers and farming in the UK. So our job is to look at an application and say, okay, this is reasonable, this is reasonable. Have you realised that if you give this information out, it may disadvantage this group? Or have we definitely determined that this data, that there is legal permission on which to give this out? So we're there to be very, very critical. The panel is made up of a quite frighteningly high level group of experts, of which I'm not one. I'm the herder, but they're real experts in agroeconomics, in data, in law, and representatives from all the different corners of livestock farming as well are involved. So we can be quite brutal with some applications, just to reassure you all, and we'll push back on anything we think could disadvantage a section of the community that's being interrogated for data. Generally though, our principle is big data is good, and especially if it's aggregated and anonymized, that can't hurt anyone, and in fact that can only help the UK understand its own position in the world in terms of its livestock production, and hopefully help it in the marketplace in the future. Maybe we'll get to a point where the system is so clever you yourselves can look at your own trends of what's happening on your own farms. The system isn't clever enough to do that yet, but it has the potential to. So it's really important that via groups like the NSA you get, what do you want, as well as what do maybe corporates want, or what government wants, or what assurance schemes want. So make sure you do get those requests of what you want through to Phil, who can represent that at TDUG, because that's where we do discuss the detail of functionality of the system. But on the data advisory service, it's really about saying, are you sure? Have you thought about this? This is a consequence we are concerned could occur. And sometimes it could be, actually, you might find the data's better if you ask this question as well. And that came up in a whole farm assurance application that came through from the data owners themselves. So even the data owners run their data requests through the panel. So I think that's very healthy. At the moment, we're a temporary entity. We were brought together for 6 months, but that was extended for a further 6 months because it seems to be going well. And at the end of that, there'll be a formal review, and DEFRA and ADHB will decide if they think we're valuable enough to keep. And obviously, I hope they will, because I think we have added significant value to the process. I think one of the things I did want to just raise is what's really important for us sometimes when we're grappling with unforeseen consequences is there can be some people on the panel who get very concerned about down to individual level farms, and we have to be quite clear that if it's a commercial request, that we're really clear that those permissions are built into the contracts you may have with that commercial entity as a provider. And we have to trust that you are reading those contracts properly and signing them as grown-up individual business people. We're not a union, so we're recognizing that if you've signed a contract that says, and I give this wholesaler the right to know X, Y, and Z about my farm, then you've signed that, you've given that permission. So I want everyone to become more data aware. Don't just tick the box, don't get cookie fatigue. You know, if it's a commercial contract that involves the use of data, read it. If you've got questions, take advice before you sign it, because once you have signed it, we have, you know, ADHB and DEFRA have the right to share data within the terms of that contract. So please be aware of what you're signing. The devil is always in the detail. But overall, we think big data is good, big data is useful, it's good for the UK as an industry, and it could be, you know, if we get this right, it could produce world leader status, because we could be in a position where we know more about the animals that are ending up in the food chain, and we can testify to how wonderfully well they've been looked after until they get there, and everyone's a winner, and we end up with premium product and a lovely marketplace. So it's all for the good, but don't worry, there is a safety net, and the safety net is us being the awkward squad asking difficult questions of every single application that comes in.
Great. Thanks, Jeanette. You done?
I think so.
Yeah,
so
no, that's excellent.
Cover off anything else?
No, that's excellent. Well, again, you can play part in the discussions later on with a bit of luck as well. But you know, some really key messages there, and I think it's a great place to start, because I think it's absolutely right that people do need reassurances, and I think it's really good that that we've got the data advisory panel working in relationship to the LIS to give that the ground truthing or check really on the use of and the release of data. And there's a question for me as to whether we want to explore the use of that panel or a similar sort of structure for wider data management across the industry. Actually, I think it's got a really positive impact. It has a real positive impact, and it's a good model. So thanks very much, Jeanette. Okay, so to introduce our second speaker, well, Leslie needs very little introduction. Actually, most of you will know Leslie, but Leslie Stubbins works as a sheep consultant. She's been involved in the sheep industry for many years, and let's not explore that one too much, Leslie. But you know, most people will know you. Leslie also chairs SCOP, Sustainable Control of Parasites in Sheep, and has been involved in many sheep-related productivity and health initiatives for many years, and is currently really leading the RDP SCAB program, along with Stu Burgess from Morden as well. But Leslie, I'll pass over to you, because I know you've got some great examples of where we can use, and we've shown that we can use and share data to improve the health status of our sheep flock. Leslie.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to talk this morning. You can see that presumably okay. If just check
Yes.
that you can see my screen. Okay, that's wonderful. Yeah, as I say, thank you for the opportunity. Being the technical person that I am, I'm going to use that RDPE scheme as an example of how farmers can share data and are sharing data, really is a bit of a platform. And I know Jonathan, I'm sure, will widen that out into the bigger field of how that's going to fit with other things. But first of all, to say that this is an RDPE project on sheep scab, and you know, it's not me alone. It started off with SCOPS back in 2018, and I'll explain why we started way back then and came to fruition last year. But it's a massive effort, and it is being led by Stu Burgess at Moredun. So I'm one of the steering group, and by Richard Wall at Bristol. But it also involves coordinators across 3 areas of the country: NSA, Cumbria Farmer Network and ADAS. The vet practices and the vets that are involved have been amazing, and the farmers themselves. So it's a massive effort, and hopefully I can just demonstrate to you how the sharing of information, specifically health information, is and coordinating treatments is really working. So just in terms of background to that then, obviously the number of outbreaks of sheep scab has been an Achilles heel for us for a long time. You know, we did eradicate it in the 50s, we got it back in the 70s. And in the early 1990s, sheep scab control was effectively deregulated, other than there is still an order which requires people with clinical disease to treat animals. The law still sits there. But we're looking at the moment at about somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 outbreaks a year. But the problem with that is fairly static, because that is clinical outbreaks. And one of the problems with a disease like sheep scab is that there's a lot of flocks which are what we would call persistently infected. So, you know, their animals are fairly immune, they're not showing clinical disease, but there's a lot of sheep scab there messing around. And of course, sheep move around a lot, as we all know. And that is where sheep scab has been moving. So the actual number of affected flocks is going to be way higher than 10,000. Now, against that background, and one of the reasons why we had to get involved was that the treatments that we have for sheep scab, that looks like quite a reasonable list when you look at it, but actually there are only 2 different types of treatment. Everything apart from the top one, which is a diazinon organophosphate dip, everything else is an injectable macrocyclic lactone. And the problem that we faced was that in 2017, the first cases of resistance to the macrocyclic lactones in sheep scab mites were uncovered. Unfortunately, SCOPS was given the heads up by the authors before this was published in early 2018, and we were able to put an industry workshop together to decide what we were going to do about it. Because clearly the other issue that we had was that these products also are wormers, and we're running into resistance with them as well. And with just diazinon left, we needed to move, which is what we did. And I won't go into that detail now. So that was negative driver that got us there. And one of the issues with scab until about 2017 was that the only way that we could diagnose it was when it had really got hold in a flock. So we had to do skin scrapes, and people were using these products either on the basis of a diagnosis at a pretty late stage in the epidemiology of the disease on the farm, or they were using them as insurance treatments, which is obviously a lot of the time they were using them unnecessarily because of the threat, and rightly so. That's where we were at that point. The issue that we've got, and I've alluded to this, is that, you know, we've got 3 sheep here. We've got the one sheep there that's not infested. That looks okay. But this one looks okay as well. This is recently infested. It might, it says weeks, it might even take months before that animal become clinically have sheep scab. And then we've got these guys, which are the flocks that I was alluding to, where there's a lot of immune sheep. There's a low level of infestation. They don't look ill. They don't showing clinical disease. But if that sheep moved into a naive flock, it would set everything going and there would be sheep scab. So the game breaker, the game changer here was when the Moredun developed an ELISA blood test, which meant that we could actually, with a blood test, detect the presence of sheep scab in a flock from as little as 2 weeks post-infestation. And that's a complete game changer, because it means we can get ahead of the disease. And this is really what the RDPE scheme has been built on. It is a whole flock management thing, and again, that's something that's important to remember. It's changing the way that we're starting to use some of this information from testing in a health context. And it's been commercially available since 2017, but it's only really in the last couple of years we've really got going with it. So it is a complete game changer, and it means that we can detect the disease before clinical signs appear, and that is critical if we're going to get ahead of sheep scab. So what happened is happening in this project, and how does that relate to us and data and the need to share data? Well, the RDPE project, we managed to win funding for, and it started, it's a 2-year project, that's all. We got half the funding that we originally wanted, so it's been a struggle. We haven't been able to do as much blood testing as we would have liked to have done, but nevertheless, it is proving to be very successful. What we've done is we're looking at a targeted and coordinated community-based project, but that really does mean farmers, their vets, coordinators are critical, have had to work together, not only work together, they have to share information together as well. So we've got 3 areas that we've concentrated on, and we had funding to be able to take 300 farms in total forward. We've got there the Northwest, which with the Cumbria Farmer Network are coordinating. In the Midlands, ADAS are coordinating one which is basically in Herefordshire and Shropshire, and in the Southwest, NSA are coordinating Devon and Cornwall. Sorry, it's Devon, I think. I don't think it's Cornwall, it's just Devon. And of course, we're focusing on these hotspots because we want to synchronize the testing and the treatment. We want coordinated action. There's no point in one farmer treating if the farmer next door isn't treating within a window where we can control the disease. We want to try and stop the spread of resistance, but it's built on clusters of cooperating farmers. And this is what's really important, I think, is that we've identified clusters of farmers to work together within these hotspots of disease. And the hotspots of disease, incidentally, have been highlighted from research from Bristol University, but also is being underpinned by some really quite sophisticated and well-informed modelling. And again, that's another way that data can be used. And I think, Jeanette was talking about big data, the big data value of feeding into disease models, and particularly this model takes into, and we're enhancing it now to be able to take more on board in terms of animal movement. That is really important. So it's not just this project, we are looking at the wider implications of modelling as well. And and a cluster, those of you who are as old as me, probably not many, have still emblazoned on their brains the word contiguous from foot and mouth disease. It was something that we woke up with in the morning and we went to sleep with at night in 2001. But this is what we've used within the clusters. So it basically is farms that are within half a kilometre of each other and hopefully have some sort of physical barrier to allow us to have some sort of break point. So a road or a river or, a big tract of non-populated with livestock land or whatever, to try and give us a definitive cluster. And where farmers then have to agree to share their scab status with neighbours. And given the stigma that sheep scab has had over the years, that was one of the things we were concerned, would they do that? And I have to say, they do. It has been amazing. I'll show you a slide in a minute, just to sort of pull together where we are at the moment. And they have to report and treat scab cases. And they have to, obviously, and I'll come back to that just at the end in a minute, quarantine returning sheep. And so we were asking quite a lot of farmers. And I should also say that whilst the project was funding the coordination and funding the blood testing, the project does not fund the treatment costs. And I think that, again, is another important thing as to how these people have really embraced this and it hasn't actually been a major barrier. What have we learnt so far? Well, the interest and the uptake has been phenomenal, to the point where we were oversubscribed. So, really positive engagement, peer pressure, bringing people in who were hesitant to start with. Not everybody, we've still got the odd person, of course, who doesn't want to join the party, but generally speaking, the effort of the coordinators and the vets involved and the farmers themselves has brought people in. So all 3 regions are fully recruited. We had more farmers wanting to join, and some of them, in fact, have gone on and just paid for it themselves because we could not actually fund it. Local coordination is absolutely key, and I think this comes back to the level of trust in terms of data sharing and health status sharing, and the importance of having that trustworthy person on the ground. They are generally very willing to share their results when it's within the context of a specified objective, and that trust element is there. And I think, Jonathan, I'm sure you might want to pick up on this as well. What it's allowing us to do, and it hasn't been easy, is to start to shift the focus away from just the individual's results to a cluster status, to what's going on around me. How do I work with the people around me? And that's applied to the vets involved and to the farmers to really be able to engage at that level. And this is a really nice example. This is some of the clusters in one of the lots. I won't say which one, but there are 7 clusters in one of these areas. And I've highlighted number 4 there. So you can see the percentage of positives at the first test. We're doing 2 blood tests on these farms over time. And number 4 had 2/3 of them were positive. Now, if I then tell you that number 4 was the one cluster who were absolutely adamant, we don't have sheep scab. We don't have sheep scab in our cluster. We don't have, and when we got the results, we thought, oh dear, how do we actually tell them that they've got the highest prevalence of all of the clusters? But they were fine. Because they understood, they were prepared to share it. Because they understood it, they just embraced it, said, yeah, okay, we need to get on and deal with this. We can't have this. We didn't realize it. We're going to deal with it. And it was that change in attitude and being able to support them through that process. So finally then, just where are we going next? Obviously, the big question everybody wants to know when you go down a process like this is only very small. We're looking at exemplars within this project. And I'm pretty sure that within a lot of these clusters, we will be able to, at the end of the project, say, this cluster currently does not have any active scab. The big question is, how do we keep it out? So the next phase of the project is to turn it round a little bit and to start looking at how we use the blood test to keep areas free of sheep scab and to embrace this issue, which is that movements are our Achilles heel. And we do have, obviously purchased and returning animals, but the next stage of the project, we're going to be working with 2 commons in the north of England, looking at on-off testing onto the common grazing, as a preliminary to looking at movements in more generally. So again, that's looking at the bigger stuff I think that Jeanette was talking about, and being able to use those movements. If I may, Phil, I'll just finish with this slide very quickly. I think this links in particularly with what Jeanette was saying as well. But I do think I've just used an example of the sheep scab project very, very quickly to show how we are making progress with just that one bit of health data, but equally some of the wider things. But we do have to have clarity of objective. And I think this is what Jeanette was absolutely saying. If we're going to do this, be really careful. But from a point of view of motivation, that's a must. There's no point in saying, well, we're going to do this, and everybody looking a little bit blank saying, well, that might be a good idea, but why? It's got to be measurable and meaningful, of course. And we want tangible benefits to the farmers. And again, this is what Jeanette and Phil and Jeanette were saying. It's got to be tangible. And clearly, being free of sheep scab is a massively tangible benefit. We've just, it cost the industry about 200 million a year in our latest calculations. But equally, and I was really interested to hear both Jeanette and Phil refer to this really, we've got to have awareness of where we might need some mitigation and to be careful. and of the unintended consequences and reverse expectations, if you like, which is what the psychologists would talk about. We've got to be really aware of that. And, things like Phil mentioned, lambing percentage, got to be really careful that we understand all of the factors involved in something like that, because as Jonathan, I'm sure, will tell you, if you drive down that road too heavily, you can suddenly find your AMR use go back up because people are being driven down there. So I just wanted to bring it a little bit wider to finish my presentation, Bill.
That's great. Thank you very much, Leslie. And that was a great summary at the end as well. Summarizes things very well. There's got to be something in this for farmers. Otherwise, they're just simply not going to engage with it, really. So great. Thank you. So to introduce our third and final speaker, Jonathan Statham is actually professor. He's a vet and he's professor of sustainable livestock health and welfare at the relatively newly formed vet school at Keele. He's also the chair of the Animal Health and Welfare Board for England, and he's had a really key role in working with others, I guess, to design the future Pathway Animal Health and Welfare program coming out of DEFRA. And as I said earlier, there will be a strong element there of the power of big data, I guess. So, so Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks very much for the invitation. I'll just share a few slides as well, if that's okay. So just want to check whether that onto, if I can, onto. Is that shared okay? How's that working? Is that looking at marvelous?
Well, can you put it on presentation? I don't know if it will work or not.
Yeah,
that's it. That's perfect. That's perfect.
Has that gone through?
Yeah,
great stuff.
Good.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for the invitation. Obviously, great to hear Jeanette and Leslie's talks as well. And as you said, Phil, kind of a number of hats, and I'm very much still in practice. And I want to kind of combine really some perspectives about kind of data and the kind of politics of kind of sharing information from a practice perspective, first of all, and then really connect those with the work on animal health and welfare pathway, which basically is part of really kind of my role as kind of chair of Animal Health and Welfare Board. So the combination of the two, and certainly this weekend I was on call and living the dream as a kind of Dales vet and trying to persuade lambs and calves to enter the outside world. So it was a fairly well kind of connected kind of spring. So I wanted to really thank my sort of colleagues, I think, so first of all, in kind of Bishopton sort of veterinary group, so Laura Reid and Graham Tibbett, for putting a lot of sort of work together. And we really want to talk about kind of medicines use first of all, and the kind of flock health schemes and kind of clubs that we run. Bishopton's been providing veterinary services in Yorkshire the last 77 years, and so as a long established kind of farming sort of group. But looking at some of the challenges in kind of data sharing and how we use them, and as Leslie just said, having clear reasons for doing that really is kind of what I want to start off a little. And there's a lot of product use. Some of it is for very good reason, and some of it is there as a kind of obviously supporting piece. But what's really key is understanding that of this line, we've got our products for sale, and therefore the expectation of the general public that we've got products that are what they want to buy. I think increasingly we need to persuade a skeptical public that we've got animals of high welfare, that we haven't got antimicrobial residues in there, and that therefore we've got the kind of the top quality which we all even need. And increasingly that becomes really important. So what we actually did is put together last year, again, and Laura and Graham led a lot of the work on this, was basically some of our flock health schemes, flocks, in discussion group work. We just basically anonymously reviewed antimicrobial usage. And this involved about 41,000 sheep across about 43 of those flocks. And again, just looking at what data can offer in terms of information and in terms of opportunities, this kind of group, average number of breeding sheep was 376, but ranged about 7 to obviously 1,200. And just as a perspective, average use about 3 litres of antibiotics per flock. And popular medicines, amoxicillin, oxytetracycline injection and spray, pen strep, and of course everyone's very conscious at the moment of watering mouth and availability of kind of products. But just a perspective across this group, 41,000 animals, but 11 litres of Spectrum Scalpel, 9 litres of pen strep, quite large volume, but a lot of animals. The detail. What we were able to sort of realise was that we could group these flocks into a kind of a first group that had got quite high prevalence of disease, but actually weren't using many antimicrobials. We got a second group that had got quite high prevalence of disease, but were using lots of antimicrobials. A third group that were using quite a lot of antimicrobials, but hadn't got very much disease. And then a final group that were in the kind of sweet spot of actually, really good flock health and also not using many antibiotics. And again, anonymously, we shared all this work, very much as Leslie described, we shared all this within all these flocks. So it was part of our discussion groups and part of the flock health clubs within the practice. And we just looked again at, how many products the flocks use. And, some of these flocks only used a couple. Some other flocks were using 8 different antibiotic products. And what it really gave us the opportunity was to ask why. Were there good reasons for usage in all those things? And also to look at the variety. So across those 41,000 sheep and nearly 45 flocks actually, the range in use, so the volumes used were really big. So, we've got one of those flocks was nearly 50 milligrams, of antibiotics per population corrected unit, and some of them were down at only around 1. So there was a huge range in use. And doing this kind of comparison allowed us to have this discussion very to as Leslie described, within a trusted group, is on a one-to-one basis in some cases, but also within group discussions, and ask the question, can actually we do more to help? Can we work together to deal with some of those challenges? Because actually all of those 4 groups have got different sets of needs. So if we look in terms of that first group, some of those flocks that have got high disease prevalence but aren't using many antibiotics potentially need to use more. Potentially there could be welfare issues in those flocks because they might not actually be treating things effectively. So there is a need here appropriately to, in high disease flocks, potentially review whether we've got sufficient usage in a targeted way. But actually in a lot of situations, we're really looking at what the root causes are. And as you can see, in all these cases, we're really trying to get into a low disease situation where the need for antibiotics is reduced. That is fundamentally the #1 priority. And you can see that all these groups, the arrows are all pushing towards that group 4, where disease is low and therefore the need for antibiotics is low. But in particular, we're looking at that group 2, where we've got high levels of disease and high uses of antibiotics. And therefore we've got a real priority for that group to reduce their levels of disease and therefore reduce their need to use antibiotics. In the bottom right-hand corner, we've actually got flocks there which have got low levels of disease, but are still using quite high levels of antibiotics. And again, there's opportunities there to save money, to reduce their antimicrobial use and therefore manage the risk of resistance. But it's just helping to understand that by this comparison across the different groups. Just from that sort of practice-based discussion where by understanding the information we had available and by comparing across, that kind of group of flocks, we were able to actually work with flocks to reduce their need for antibiotics, but still make sure we got high welfare because animals that needed treatment were appropriately treated. So big opportunity, I think, and certainly we're balancing the need for health and welfare together with responsible use of antibiotics. And in many cases, we were able to significantly reduce that kind of usage there. So perhaps what that does is link from a kind of regional and practice scale into some of the initiatives that are going on a national level And the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway is an England initiative, but obviously, really kind of keen for strong collaboration and linking with, really sort of important initiatives that are already underway actually in Wales and in Northern Ireland. So kind of good communication and linkage, although the pathway is kind of an England initiative at this point. And what is it? Well, I mean, the most important thing about the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway is it's about higher welfare and healthier animals. And that is the fundamental idea, in the same way as those flock health clubs, is by having key bits of information, we're able to make good decisions and demonstrate to the wider public and international trade that we can back up our excellent welfare standards and excellent health status, but we can prove it. And it's really important that for a skeptical public and also for international trade, that we can actually show that we've got the evidence for what's going on. And there are three kind of key pillars really about the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway. It is about improving performance overall in terms of where we are, health and welfare, but it is about providing support. It is about public money, funding schemes to deliver those health and welfare enhancements, and therefore about stimulating trade in terms of providing, those bits of evidence and certainty for consumers, both domestically, but also obviously support for farmers to do that. And what's been quite, unique and has been, quite unprecedented, the way that this has involved discussion and collaborative working between government and industry. It has been, an incredibly time-consuming and detailed and challenging process of working together, starting off with a small steering group, looking across all the different sectors, but then starting to look at how we can deliver the design of how engagement, how legislation catches up with that, and therefore working together and allowing that dialogue to evolve what the pathway can offer. And it is a pathway that will evolve. It isn't that it's going to be set in stone once it starts. It'll be about listening to industry, about listening to farmers, about listening to vets, about refining what's happening, and therefore being able to move forward to actually deliver those high standards of health and welfare that we want to be able to show. Because the wider benefits are there in terms of return for the national bottom line, understanding our international reputation, therefore supporting export trade, commitments towards where we are with kind of climate change, but also vital at the moment about food security, understanding how important it is that we've got that resilience in our food supply. And because of that, it's important we can reduce the need for veterinary medicines so that we don't have increased rise in antimicrobial resistance. So all these big benefits come together with that kind of pathway approach. And there are 4 key steps. There's an annual review, so there's an annual veterinary kind of led review between vets and farmers, and I'll just talk about that very briefly. There's support for endemic disease programs, and so there's an initial phase of that, but obviously looking to develop that. Grants for all sorts of elements of equipment and capital grants, and then there's kind of the prospect of kind of payment by results on high bits of performance later down the line. And so just last couple of slides really about the review, and therefore linking together with that flock health discussion I talked about within our practice, and about how data from a local and regional base can be shared nationally for bigger benefits. Because the review is really all about trusted discussions between farm vet and the farmer about health and welfare of basically the flock, to talk about actions on an individual basis between that vet and farmer, and looking at some diagnostic testing, which is all about looking at anthelmintic resistance in flocks. And these discussions are ongoing to make sure these programs are agreed on and appropriate between kind of industry and government. So there's both individual benefit to flocks, but also national benefits too. The key bit around medicines usage, again, to link back to those kind of flock health discussions, are really around making sure that we've got responsible use of antimicrobials, that we use in vaccines where we can and where they're appropriate. And the pathway is going to involve a recommendation to start to engage with HDB's Central eMedicines Hub. Because the opportunity to be able to have a central view on those antimicrobial and medicines usage is really valuable. And being able to do that in an anonymized way, in an aggregated way, is a really important thing to be able to actually show what's going on rather than have gaps in those data and information. But also what it does is it shows opportunities for how we can potentially look at use of new kind of new innovations as well. Is there. It's an opportunity now. The pathway is going to start that encouragement to engage with the eMedicines Hub, so that actually we're able to show our usage. We're able to show that we've got really good health, and therefore we're not relying on medicines in a way that's kind of inappropriate, and we can actually prove the state of the industry in these areas. What that means, therefore, is that the collection of data is done in a trusted way and is not going to be shared that can be used for either regulatory or inspection activity. This is about sharing data in a trusted way, mainly between the vet-led team and the farmer, to actually improve the benefits for health and welfare in the flock. The vet will then provide recommendations and help support those changes, and also advice about kind of ongoing monitoring and signpost further support and further information as well. The key thing is, therefore, the data is going to be categorized in different areas. So most of the kind of specific information will just be shared between the farmer and the vet. There will be aggregated data that's just about numbers of animals, and potentially, therefore, encouragement to share that medicines use data, and encouragement to share, obviously, the information around health testing results. But it's going to be important that there is an agreed, as Jeanette described earlier on, that there's an understanding of what information is shared, and that only on an anonymized and aggregated basis as well. Phil, and again, thanks very much for the invitation to come and speak.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you. Again, another excellent presentation, and it really does demonstrate that it feels as though we're entering a new era, doesn't it, really, where there is a real appetite and a need for a much closer partnership between industry and government. And when I say government, I mean government in on a UK basis, not just DEFRA, but also devolved nations, and again how we can link all of those devolved administrations together as well, so that we start to aggregate data on a UK level. But where there was always used to be a lot of suspicion amongst industry, I guess, that DEFRA administrations were looking for data to be able to penalize or fine or criticize farmers. There is definitely a change of attitude that's going on in terms of us trying to gather data to use it for collective best interest, and to support the industry to make improvements, to position our interests in a better place in the future. I still come back to the absolute need to build trust. I mean, Leslie, you made this point that if there's got to be something in it for farmers to encourage them to, it's got to be targeted, it's got to be objective, and there's got to be real benefits to farmers in terms of sharing this data, and they need the sort of protections that Jeanette and Jonathan both outlined in their presentations as well. So there's some big questions about how we move forward with some of this, really, and I guess get farmers to engage with some of the tools and the programs that are with us and are going to become available in the future. So we've got a few questions that have popped up in the Q&A. I think that there aren't many at the moment, but do keep them coming in if people want to ask questions. But the first one is for Gwyn. Really just asking Jeanette whether you've looked at the more open approach that takes place in countries such as Denmark. And again, I wouldn't know, I don't know if you know anything about this at all, but if so, what do you see as dangers in the way they do things?
We have, simply because the first data request we had to look at was from a very famous Danish-Swedish brand, which I don't have to mention. And it was incredibly contentious. And what it really came down to, they're asking government to supply certain data, and there was a real question of why do they want it, what use is it, how will it potentially disadvantage farmers that don't that aren't part of this scheme, and even some panel members brought up the ethical behaviour of this organisation in the first place. And that's when we had to take a bit of a step back and say, do you know what, that's not our job. Our job is to look at this request in its entirety, and what really matters is what have the individual farmers who are contracted to this business already agreed to share. And what we can't do is let a big application scope creep from that agreement with the individual farmers. And that's why I cannot emphasize enough that people must scrutinize their own contracts, because it's no one else's job to do that. So in terms of, are we ready to go to a more open system such as they have in Denmark, it's pretty clear to me we are not psychologically, if anything, ready to go to that place. I think it's possible that if LIS works in a way that demonstrates benefit to farmers en masse over time, that it could become such a trusted source that people are more willing to share more information and become more open. But at the moment we're not there, and I think it would be foolish to try and run before we can walk.
Jeanette, you raised another really interesting point you did in your presentation as well about farmers becoming more data aware and taking the response. You're really knowing and thinking about what it is when they're entering into commercial contracts, be that with software providers or supply contracts with commercial companies. We all do it, don't we? It's so easy to tick that box at the end of the form, isn't it, and not really think what it means. But there's a real responsibility. It's essential that we all start to take this much more seriously. And I guess, Jonathan, in relation to, we're talking about there about supply chain contracts, we are talking about contracts with the government in the future in terms of animal health and welfare pathway too. So this whole approach of much more clarity about what sort of data sharing agreements that we're entering into, I think is going to be really important.
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. I think just to come in briefly, on that, I think, one of the key discussions that's going on at the moment is about understanding different categories of data sharing and permissions. And one key part of the pathway is being clear about a trusted individual, but therefore closed data sharing agreement between vet and vet-led team and the farmer that is about actually sharing data for the benefit of that individual flock. As the sort of discussions and examples I showed, it's possible to target and understand opportunities for improving what's happening. At the same time, there is a big opportunity with the right understanding and trust to show on a more national scale that reassurance that we need for the general public to keep buying our product, and the need to be able to make the case for international trade that we can actually evidence the high standards of health and welfare that we have, but we have to be able to show it. And I think therefore it's being clear about which bits of information are shared in those areas, and therefore that they're not going to be used for inspection purposes or enforcement, for example, because that is going to obviously be key in people being confident and comfortable that those big opportunities are okay and safe to do.
I really like that slide that you showed where you put those categories of three different categories, I think, of the information and where it would be shared between the farmer and the vet only, and and made more available on an aggregated level. That's the sort of communication that we need to make use of, I think, isn't it, when we're getting farmers to engage with this. Leslie, if you've got anything that you'd like to add to that, really, I mean.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the case is being made. We have got to be careful, and I think we all groan about GDPR and so on. I think that has a little bit of a sort of a groan factor with it, but we do have to be more aware, as Jeanette and Jonathan are saying. I think also, though, sometimes I think we have to be careful a bit with big data. I mean, I'm looking at the the antibiotic resistance part of the pathway at the moment, and that's one area where we are, we are having to be careful in terms of how that is used, because that could actually be used in a negative context if we don't handle it properly. So again, it comes back to the objective, doesn't it? What's the objective? What's the motivation? But I think the sheep scab project, carrot and stick is okay as motivation for certain things, and there tends to be the humdrum things, but a lot of the time people are motivated by things outside of that, and it's not always money that motivates them. And I think the sheep scab project has really underlined that for me. That wasn't a monetary motivation, that is a motivation to actually get something out of it. So from the farmer's point of view, it's just really capitalizing on those different motivations to get where we want to be.
I've got two other questions that have come in a way relate to this conversation. There's a direct request or an ask really: who is represented on the panel that scrutinizes the data on the data advisory panel? What is the makeup of that panel? And we did go to quite a lot of efforts to try to make sure that that was truly representative across the whole area of interest. But Jeanette, do you just want to answer that one?
Yeah, I'm not going to give you a list right now off the top of my head. That would be bonkers. But what I will do is make sure that Phil's office have got a list of who's currently on the panel. As I say, remember, it is a temporary panel at the moment, and if anyone has very strong feelings about who should and shouldn't be involved in the conversation, there will be a review coming up in 6 months' time where those opinions can be taken into account.
And I don't think the question is asking who is on the panel. It's more about the interest areas that are represented on the panel. So
the broad areas. So we have people who are experts in big data, specifically within a farming context or related context. So it's not people who are from Facebook or something. They are people who are in the agronomics business and are very focused on data. We have academics from agronomics as well, who are very hot on data use. We have, as I said, we have representation from each of the main livestock farming areas. As a more boots on the ground view, we have a legal representative who is not there to give legal advice, but to give opinion from a legal perspective. We still expect DEFRA to stump up for lawyers for legal advice. And yeah, I mean, I'm there because I'm not invested in livestock. That's why I chair it. It's the whole business of it is to be independent and to provide scrutiny. And that's our job, to be the awkward squad, and we are. And we're constructive when we can be, and we're difficult when we need to be, or when we feel we need to be. The ultimate decisions, however, do lie with data owners, which for statutory data are, and things that are put into lists, that is DEFRA and AHDB. They are the data owners. As I said, even their requests get run through us for sanity checking.
Absolutely, it's not you that make the final decision, is it?
No,
It is AHDB and DEFRA in this case. Yeah. But that again is a really sorry, go on, Janet.
It usually comes with, okay, we're kind of okay with this, but we really recommend that you request this information from them, that you make them jump through these 3 hoops, that you clarify these 4 points, and that you take out that whole section because we don't see its relevance. So we will be very specific in the feedback that the owners get before they release data.
Yeah. And it is seen as being a really important part of building that trust, isn't it, between partners, between players within this the industry. There is proper scrutiny going on in terms of making data release decisions. So Jan has asked a question as well, again relating to this subject generally. I guess all data has a monetary value. Who benefits from this? Does or will any filter back to the individual farmer? Now,
no one benefits at the moment. It's just a thumping great big bill that we are expected to pay every quarter. There's certainly no inflow of money coming in at the moment, but there is the potential. You're absolutely right. Data has value. There is potential in the future. And again, at the moment, within our terms of reference that we've created for the panel, there are 2 areas in which we would push back to the data owners or to lists who've received the application if there are costs involved. So for example, one of them could be we want XYZ data, and we say, well, okay, we don't see a problem in you having it, but there's going to be a significant cost in us retrieving it. And we need to actually know if the system's in a place where retrieving it is even possible. And we would have to make that applicant pay to do that pre-work before an application could proceed. And it may be that pre-work throws it out the water, but that cost should not fall to anyone other than the applicant. The other issue would be if we feel that there's value to the data and it should be paid for by a third party, usually if it's a commercial application, then we would recommend that a charge be made, but we would not get into the detail of what that charge should be. That's not our remit. It's just for us to say, if you're giving this away, we think it has a value and you should explore that value, and probably talk to the specific livestock areas involved before you go ahead.
And we are talking about several different levels here, aren't we? Because at the level that you're talking about there, where we maybe are collecting industry-wide information or data that could have a commercial use and could be sold and could return some value. But we're also, then when we go back to talking about the sort of data and information that Leslie and Jonathan were talking about, I think the monetary value there is for the benefit back to the farmer for efficiency improvements and health and welfare improvements.
Yeah, and actually, so I'd say at our level, it still is. So some, the applications we've looked at, some of it is saying, actually, if LIST can provide this data you've already signed up to sharing with this entity, and they can do it in one go rather than you have to go into 14 databases to get the answers, you therefore are being paid back in time, and time is money. So efficiency shouldn't be underestimated as a value as well. Yeah,
Jonathan.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. And I think first of all, I wholeheartedly agree that there's a huge opportunity for targeted use. If with blanket use of medicines is a great example of where if we don't know when or which animals to target, basically costs go up and we've got increased waste and impact as well as resistance pressures. So I think there's a huge value in targeted approaches to everything. So it is a great opportunity, and I think but there's also, perhaps we should be clear the difference between data and information, because actually there's a risk now. We've gone from almost a data desert situation to sometimes now data overload. So we've got potentially at times just having data isn't helpful. It can be confusing. It can be frustrating. It can actually soak up time, which is very precious, in trying to filter, to use data in a way that's actually got value. So I think I just want to make the point that actually adding value to data so that we can use it is critical. And that's a step that still needs a lot of work. And also maybe just make the point as well, Phil, is that the pathway, of course, is there is public money there, so £436, for a flock review visit. So that is to go to the farmer to help, support some of the time to gather the data and to get these things rolling. So there is some public money coming in to help that review process, to help gather some of those data. But adding value, I think, is key. Then we've got to remember the difference between just data overload and actually smart data.
Yeah. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and it is 9:34 at the moment. So I'm just going to take one more question. We've got a few more other points that have been made in the Q&A, and we will come back and come back to the people that made those questions and give answers. But I just want to pick up on it. It's a classic question, isn't it, really? Leslie, you mentioned farmers and vets very engaged with the sheep scab project, and I guess Jonathan, you did in terms of the flock health clubs as well. But how as an industry do we engage with the less engaged farmers and vets in terms of data and data recording and getting them to play a part?
It's always it's always going to be the difficult one, isn't it? Because and it comes back to what I was saying about the motivation. But what we have found is that obviously we didn't get 300 farmers engaged in this project initially. There were a lot of keen people, and they brought people on board. And some people are still, it's taken them a while to trickle in. In fact, we thought to start with maybe we'd have to run into the second year before we would get more people. But it didn't take so long once people started talking amongst themselves and they got some trust and they realized that actually there's something to be gained here. I'm not going to lose anything. That's not to say we haven't still got the odd awkward customer still, but you know, that's life. You're always going to have that. But I think peer pressure and trust and having a clear objective, you know, I think you're absolutely right, Jonathan. The data overload thing, you know, farmers have been asked to do a lot over a lot of years, and I've been doing this job for a long while, and a lot of people have always said to them, oh, you know, we used to start off by saying, oh, the most important thing as far as profitability of sheep is concerned is stocking rate. Well, great. I mean, that took us down a some really blind alleys, didn't it? And you know, so we've got a history of people being a bit skeptical about, oh, how are you going to use this? How is this going to benefit me? And now obviously we've got EID technology. I spend a lot of my life, I don't understand it all. I've got somebody who works with me who does understand it better, but you know, plethora of information, a dearth of software that can actually deliver the sort of management, ongoing management information I need in my everyday life. So we've got to work with it. We've got to understand, I think, and develop some of the software capability that can do that for us.
Thanks, Leslie. And Jonathan, have you got a final comment on that?
I think I couldn't agree more with what Leslie said. And I think that the SCAB basically, you know, project is a great example, isn't it, of inspiring, you know, both the team approach and also just the kind of getting perhaps some initially more skeptical, you know, farmers and vets involved, because actually that peer pressure works. And I just wanted to kind of, you know, put that as the same, you know, discussions around the pathway, but also around obviously, you know, similar programs in, you know, in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland as well, that actually if we can show clear benefits and an energetic, positive vision for the amazing industry that we've got, actually, we then build confidence for vets and farmers to both stay in the industry, bring new entrants in, to have the motivation to learn new skills, to actually therefore upskill and become, in terms of growing capacity within the veterinary profession, is a really key thing. You know, there's a huge sheep industry out there, and there's loads of vets that want to be part of it. They want to be part of fulfilling work where they see a difference. You know, pulling dead lambs out of sheep is not a fulfilling part of the job. Actually preventing abortion storms and actually preventing lameness programs and seeing fantastic, you know, lamb crops out there is a rewarding part of what we do. And I think inspiring the next generation of vets to be sheep vets, you know, is really key. And that's one of the ideas of the pathway, is building that motivation for vets and farmers to see that there's a really exciting future in what we're doing.
I think that's go on, Leslie. Sorry.
So I was just going to say, I think just to really just emphasize what Jonathan was saying, you know, I think we are moving into a phase now whereby we can use data. We've got a lot more tests, like the sheep scab test. It gets us ahead of the beast, and we can look at health in a totally different way, you know, and we can the modeling, and we can use all of that to get ahead, not be chasing from behind, which is, you know, in my career where we always seem to have been. You know, we can, and as John says, we can target treatments much better. So it's a sea change, really. I think that we're sitting on now if we get it right.
Great, thanks, Leslie, and thanks everyone. I think again, two really important things that came out of both of your presentations was the importance of that local activity and local coordination. It's a really powerful way to engage people, and through that engagement, hopefully, we can get more people to engage with you know, national initiatives as well. But listen, we need to draw this to a close, I think, because I know we've all got different things to get onto. But I'd just like to thank you all very much, Jeanette, Leslie, and Jonathan, for your input today. I think it's been a really useful session. It's only the start of a process, isn't it? Because we've all still got a long way to go with this on this topic. But it's been a really useful addition to this debate around the politics of data and politics of numbers as well. So thank you very much indeed. Again, a big thank you to everyone that's joined us this morning, but also another thank you to Royce Thorns for sponsoring this morning's event. And just to let people know that we've got Sheep 2022, thankfully, back in live action on the 27th of July at Malvern. So it'd be great to see as many people as possible there, you know, for anyone that's interested to come along. But that also means that we're going to give June and July a break in terms of NSA Breakfast Club as well. We will be running our May Breakfast Club on the 4th of May, and the subject there will be around food, which I'm sure is a subject that will appeal to a lot of people, particularly as the government are intending, I think, to publicise their response to the National Food Plan during May as well. So it'll be a very topical subject, and we'll be running it on the 4th of May, and then we'll be giving Breakfast Club a break for a couple of months while we focus all of our efforts on Sheep 2022. And as I say, it'd be great to see as many as possible of you there. So thanks very much, everyone, and look forward to speaking to you again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.